some things, I'm not going to change anyone's hearts in 40 minutes, but if I can get you to look at things from a different perspective, that's a win for me. If I, I'm going to talk about things, I'm not going to bring anything new. I don't think there's a lot of that much new stuff out there, but let's work with, we know some things work. I'm going to talk about some evidence-based practices that we know work, and some of them you may heard of and some of you didn't, but just give you things to look into. I like things that are practical. I hope everybody here can leave with at least one, two, or three things and can go back and say, oh, I can try that. And I think a lot of this is about creativity and attitude. When I love training interns and counselors, and to me, the most important thing when I'm training someone is their attitude. I'd rather train somebody who has that willingness and that enthusiasm and that that internal drive to want to do things than somebody who knows knows or thinks they know everything. So I'll take attitude over knowledge. And so with engagement, a lot of this is about attitude. It's not necessarily about expertise, and we're going to get into that. I've seen people engage. Like, I'll use an example. I've seen for instance, like some 4'11" girl from a wealthy neighborhood who never really had a serious problem, like sit in a room with a bunch of guys on parole and engage those guys in the therapy session, because it's all about your attitude. I'm not going to be one of those people that just talks about, I will talk a little bit about the problem. I think the first like 7 or 8 slides are just about the problem. I don't want to go too much into it, but we know, you guys, I'm preaching to the choir. The people's attitude as far as our clients different, the circumstances are different, the resources, and this group does so much. Your group here, that's always encouraging to me to hear how much you guys are doing to bring people resources to overcome obstacles, because there are so many, and there were so many before COVID-19, and now since the pandemic, it's so much harder out there. So I give props to you guys for the work you do. It's anybody who takes on the working with kids, it can be a thankless job sometimes, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. If you don't love it, you're going to get burned out really quick. So we're working a lot, and it's a big paradigm shift. People that don't shift with the times fall behind, and we have to change our paradigm. And that's a lot of what I'm going to talk about today. So yeah, it's harder to just get those clients with those one. When you go to school, this is a good example. I see this with interns all the time. You think you get all this knowledge at school, and then you get people in your office, and you're like, you think they're going to be like, oh, I have this problem. You're going to be like, here, do this, and they're going to be, gee, thank you, and they do that. And they're like, wow, I did that, and my life is better. Thank you, counselor, or whoever you are. And that is very, 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 very rare, if not like completely a unicorn at this point. So we're dealing with much more stuff. Again, preaching to the choir. Family issues. Substances are so available. People's attitudes about substances has gotten worse. It's almost like, hey, now that marijuana is legal, that now it's harmless. That doesn't work like that. The world's very confused. The young people are very confused. Could you imagine being a young person right now? I have so much empathy, and my heart goes out to what it must be like to be a kid, to be like, where's this world going? We have an anxiety epidemic going on, and we had it before the pandemic, and now it's out of control. People, this next generation is very hopeless. When you already have the cards stacked against you with maybe a learning disability, family addiction, maybe starting dabble with things on your own, you're a 17-year-old kid. I wouldn't want to have face the world like that. What a hopeless situation. Again, but there is hope, but for the people we're working with to feel hopeless. And this concept of spirituality, people go, oh, spirituality is going to talk about God. God, that doesn't, I got nothing against God, but I'm talking about people not having a sense of purpose. And, so whatever you believe in, leaving that aside, people not having knowing where their place in the world, where they belong. We see that so much. Again, preaching to the choir. I know you guys see that with the people we work with. Very difficult. Co-occurring disorders and trauma. And I always warn against this idea. Trauma is so common nowadays, but I've come up with this concept of trauma spotting, which I put it out there just because I think sometimes people get so caught up in trauma, they think that they can identify a problem as trauma and just be like, I know what the problem is. It's trauma. And they're like, look at me. And then they walk away. Okay, well, what are you going to do about it? It's easy to call trauma and spot it, but we need to do something about it. These kids been through a train wreck. What are we going to do to help these kids? A lot of work. And we see this again. We all of us experience this frustration nowadays. We find the right program, kids don't want to go, parents don't want to go, so it makes our job a lot more challenging. There's this thing called the optimism bias, and it's an interesting. You can you look it up, man. It's really interesting, and we all have it to some degree, but hopefully we've gained a little more insight to kind of question our own optimism bias. But kids have it on a huge basis. It's the tendency to believe that you're less at risk of experiencing a negative event than others. It's not going to happen to me. We all experience it, but kids experience it like crazy. And kids who use drugs or marijuana or drink or whatever it is, vape, they have a huge optimism bias. I can't tell you how many kids around the adolescent group at CPC for a good 12 years. And being in a room with a bunch of kids that smoke weed, and they're all going to say, oh, I'm just going to smoke my weed and everything's going to be fine. And I wish everybody would just leave me alone and smoke my weed, and I'll never do another thing again. I'm fine. And we hope that that's true. And fortunately for a lot of kids, that will be true. They'll phase out of it, or that's as far as they'll go. But there's going to be some kids in that room, the just give me my weed kids, who are going to be sticking a needle in their arm at some point. We know it because we got 100,000 dead people from overdose in just the past year. So just believing that it's not going to happen to you, that's what we're working with as far as engaging these youth. And it's not a matter of us saying, well, here's what's going to happen to you, because they don't want to believe you. You didn't want to believe it when you were a teenager either. And then another thing against us, I think, is working against us is the internet. The internet has a lot of good. I'm not an anti-internet guy. I use it every day. In fact, I love going on the internet. But we know with the kids we work with, their viewpoints can be very skewed by the inaccurate information. And we also know the kids' communication skills, their engagement skills, their ability to engage with us has been hindered by this technological situation. People don't have conversations anymore. I think I put this slide in every presentation I ever do, because I love this saying: the pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects it to change, and the realist adjusts the sails. So with this paradigm shift, I think it's about being realistic. And you're going to hear me talk about harm reduction and working with what we have and the situations, because we can have these lofty ideals. Thank you, Kenneth. We can have lofty ideals, and they're only, it's good to have them, but what can we latch onto and help people move towards that's realistic? And that's a lot of what this engagement process is about. Oh, here it is, what it's all about. Taking a little summary, taking a new perspective, adapting to changes in the world and our clientele, building on what we know already works. We have a lot of evidence-based stuff. And I know I see you guys using some evidence-based programs for prevention, which is good. I'm not a prevention guy, but we have the same thing in treatment. Modifying what we know is not working, and then again, being willing to shift our paradigm. And so what do you need? So these are like the foundations if we're going to engage these youth that need mental health, they need substance use treatment. Being person-centered. And that's one of those things that I bet you if I asked people, everybody here, and said, hey, do you use a person-centered approach? Everybody's, yeah, me, I use one. And I hope you all do. I think the fact that you're here, you're trying, I want to believe it, but not everybody does. I think sometimes people think they are being person-centered, but they're not, because there's a lot to it that is not as easy as just saying it. I think it's like having a sense of humor. Everybody says they have a sense of humor, but not everybody does. So it's a lot of about what we're going to get into it, about your ego and really letting the client be the expert. And that some people have a real hard time with that, letting a teenager kind of guide things. You're not going to let them just take over the whole thing, but we have to really start where we're at. If we're going to engage people that are in those difficult places, we got to get down into those difficult places with them. Not necessarily, it helps even physically to do that, but definitely mentally and emotionally, we got to get into that world. And it takes a certain thing from the therapist or the whatever you guys consider yourself, clinician, case manager's perspective. We start where the person is, and then we engage, inspire, and motivate. So we get down into the ditch, and how can we climb out of this together? One of the things I say to clients all the time, I'm on your team. They get mad at you sometimes. They go, okay, I hear you're mad at me, but I'm on your team. I want the same outcome you do. We just might differ a little bit on how to do that, but I want what you want. I want you to be successful. I want you to be happy. I've said that with families. I say it all. What, in fact, here's a practical tool. If you ever, it's really good thing to say. Steal my line. Everybody's fighting. Be like, wait, aren't we all on the same team here? Look, mom, me, you, we all might have different views on this, but we all want little Sally or Johnny to be happy and to succeed. Let's how can we get there? And co-occurring disorders are now the norm. You know, they say that you know, that's the expectation, not the exception, that people who are using substances are also have a whole host of mental. So we got to be flexible. We got to be adaptable. There is definitely not a one size fits all. You're going to see, I'm going to come at you with different techniques. So, because I agree. I'm a big believer in an eclectic approach. I think if all you have is a hammer, you're going to treat everybody like a nail. And that's not how it is. You got to have a toolbox. I thought about that. How important is engagement? I actually sit back. I like to do introspection myself. You know what? And my answer to that is, when it comes to adolescence, engagement is everything. And the reason I say that is because you can't work with youth with difficult problems if you can't engage them. I don't care how much you know. I don't care how well you know dialectical behavior therapy or EMDR, whatever you think you know was great. Those are great things to have. But if you can't engage, then you're not getting anywhere with kids. Even adults too, but especially with kids. So with kids, it's so hard. I think about these, when I made this slide, I thought about running group, how we're constantly walking a tightrope. Again, you want to feel like it's what it's like. I know there's people here who can identify with this experience. Put yourself in a room with 10 kids who are there for mental health and substance use issues. And I say, if you're ever running a group like that, remember when you were in high school and there was a kid that like drove the teacher off the, you know, to the way they wanted to dive out of the window? Imagine being in a room with 10 kids like that who are actively smoking weed and drinking and doing God knows what else. We have to constantly walk a tightrope. We're flexible, but we have to keep the rules too. We want to be fun, but we don't want to be so fun that we're not having some kind of education. We want to be educational, but we don't want to be boring. We want to be funny, but we don't want to be so funny that we're not safe. We want to tell it like it is, but you got to be tactful about it. So again, you'll see the paradox here. You want to be spontaneous with kids, but you want to be so spontaneous that you're not planning, and they need some kind of structure and predictable. You want to have empathy and you want to be caring, but you don't want to be so caring and empathetic that you're completely giving up on the consequences. And obviously, we're non-judgmental, but we're not so non-judgmental that we're going to ignore our discernment about a safety issue and things like that. So again, it's a challenging line to walk. And you guys are walking it every day, so I give you guys credit. So what's engagement? It's to occupy the attention or efforts of a person. And when you think about engagement, it's an interesting, years ago, they were studying substance use, and you can look this study up. And it was back in like the 90s, might even in the 80s. This study is quite old, but they were like, what approach works best with people? And they studied all the different approaches, and they studied outcomes based on client surveys and things. And they basically found that some things work better than others at certain times and for certain types of people. But as a general rule, therapy works pretty much the same. And there's not one approach that outshines all the others. So the government put all this money into the study, and they said to themselves, "Oh well, that was a waste. We didn't really get much out of it." So they went back and did something very smart. They were like, "Well, let's study the people that did well and see what their therapists did." And you know what the number one reason why people did well in therapy? It's something so basic. I'm going to try to take a stab. Let's shout it out. So what do you think was the biggest factor in the people that did well? They interviewed people that did well in therapy over a long time, and they said, what helped you the most? It's not profound. It's very basic. Trust, showing up. Yes. I liked my therapist. That was the number one answer. I felt comfortable with my therapist. I felt a connection. That connection is the most valuable thing you can bring to a therapy. Very good. Comfort, very good. So we do have some evidence-based, and you can spend probably 2 or 3 days on each one of these. So if you feel like, oh, I'm rushing through them, I can't teach you motivational interviewing in one session, or the stages change. cognitive behavioral approaches, harm reduction. But if I had to say my big four, and really what we use at CPC, it's a combination of these four. And there's other things you can bring in as well. But when you want to talk about engagement, these are the four I want to touch. All evidence-based practices. So the first part about engagement is our own attitude, and this is where we help each other. Staying positive, encouraging, even when we don't feel that way. And we all know it when you have that day. You know, the one thing about I've been a therapist now 30 years, and I've made every mistake, not every one, some bad ones I've never done, thank God. But I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. You learn from your mistakes. And one of them would be going to that group of kids that are using and, you know, and saying, oh, I'm having a real bad day. Can you guys go easy on me? Worst thing you can do. You know, you're having a bad day. You are the entertainer. You are the person in the spotlight. You have to try your best, even with your headache, with your whatever you're going through, your lack of night's sleep, your kid threw up in the bed last night. I mean, believe me, I've counseled groups after all of those situations. You know, my wife texting me, oh, by the way, the dryer just broke. You know, like, you got to put that stuff on the side and you got to get into engagement mode. We stay in that mode. That we owe it to the kids. They need that. They feed off that. I see Janice nodding her head and she brings it to the table, right? I see you all the time at your school. You got it, right? Okay. And then from motivational interviewing, they call that rolling with resistance. So when kids give it to you raw, you can't give it back to them. So here again, one of your engagement tools right there. And I'll give you a good example of rolling with resistance if I ever have to teach it to people is, let's say I'm doing an assessment at CPC and I get a kid and he comes in and he says, F this place, man. The only reason I'm here is because I'm on probation. Counseling sucks, whatever, you know, they doing everything to like make me feel bad. You know, you suck, counseling sucks. And there's many ways I can hit like, well, look, man, you're on probation, kid. And until you're off probation, you better show up here or you're going to, you know, I'm calling and you're going to get in trouble, whatever. And right now, when I do that, I've just made myself an ally. I'm now a probation officer, and that's not what I am. To roll with resistance would be to get down, you know, get on the, I use this illustration. I love illustrations. Get on the, you know, you're playing that tennis match. I'm not going to tennis match that kid. I'm going to get on his side of the court and help him hit the ball against the problem. And now I'm going to come around and say, I want to engage that kid rolling resistance. Wow, I wouldn't like to be forced. Being on probation sucks. I hear you, man. You want your freedom. You don't want to have to come to this program. Let's see what we can do to get you out of here. Let's do that. Let's make this as painless as possible. Yeah, we got to talk to probation along the way, but I want you to get through this too. Let's do this, man. I'm now on that kid's side. I've engaged instead of become an adversary. Rolling with resistance. Wish I could credit myself for that one, but it's a good old MI skill, motivational interview. So being a constant source of hope and being trauma informed, and that's another one. Everybody says, oh, I'm trauma informed. And one time, it's great to, you know, on the fly, sometimes when people challenge you. I was doing a presentation for nurses once, and the one nurse says to me, trauma informed, what is trauma? What is that? Everybody talking about trauma. Tell me in one sentence, what's trauma informed? I was like, one sentence? I'll give you in one phrase. It's being nice. Like, obviously it's a lot more than that. There's techniques, there's counts, there's different things you use from a therapist. But when you boil down what someone who's trauma informed is being nice. Being nice, that kid that's being mean, that kid that's hurt, that kid that's doing whatever, being nice. And you don't have to be an expert to be trauma informed. I remember I went down to Camden. I tell the story all the time. This guy doesn't even know. I tell the story about this stranger I never met. And I went to Camden, you know, it's rough turf, we have bad drug situation and a lot of crime, all that stuff, you name it. And I go to this place and you have to have a security guard there. And I get there and I remember I'm parked, I'm in the hood, I'm nervous about my car. I had to park on grass. I'm parking on, like, there wasn't even a parking lot. It was so bizarre. But so this security guard greeted me with such a welcoming manner. I even went in and I was like, you got a trauma-informed security guard there. That security guard put me at ease, made me feel like $1 million, made me feel safe, made me feel welcome. Just the way he answered my questions and directed me where to go. I mean, it was a 3-minute interaction, but that's what trauma-informed is. I mean, it's more than that from, obviously, but that's the core of what it is, of treating people, like humans. You ever want to understand like what it's like to not be trauma informed? Next time you go to the doctor office, watch how they treat you. I use that as such a learning experience. I'm like, look at these people. Like sometimes you get nice ones, but I've been treated like crap in the waiting room by a lot of front desk. I'm like, man, that's the first person you interact with. That's the first person that they see, and it's very important that everyone is trauma informed. It's our job to be nice. It's not. It's our duty. So in motivational interviewing, they use the concept of non-judgmental empathy. So it's just like what it sounds. It's understanding people from a non-judgmental standpoint. And I think later a slide comes up about empathy without agreement. Again, practical tool to be able to separate, if you want to engage, to separate empathy from agreement. You don't have to agree with something to understand it. It's very important to conceptualize that, because I've heard people say, sex offenders, I could never work with them. Yeah, I get it. Sex offenders, they've done something very horrible. You meet people all the time, even people that aren't sex, like you'll meet a client that like, oh, thank God that person doesn't live next door to me. A person who's scary. But that doesn't mean you can't understand where that person comes from. There's a lot of things people do. You work in the substance use field, you're going to meet people that did all kinds of things, and they did it. Their brain was hijacked by substances. They made bad decisions. We're not there to judge. We're there to understand. You want to engage? Get into understanding mode. One of the greatest things you can do, keep your empathy skill sharp. That will get you. To this day, 30 years as a counselor, I have times in a session, I actually just, I'm not even, it's funny. I wonder if I think I've heard other people had this experience. I'm in a private practice session. This guy I'm working with, in my private practice, in CPC, we work with more challenging people. So I figured my private practice, let me work with the working well. I never get to do that. So I have a cash only situation. I see like 2 people a week. They're higher functioning, but this guy starts going off. And I literally say to myself, as he's talking, man, this dude needs therapy. And I'm like, wait a minute, I am the therapist. And it's okay. When you feel that way, we all feel that way sometimes. I've been in the rooms in adolescent group when I'm like, I don't know what to do right now. Get into empathy mode. You can always work on getting a deeper understanding of people. It's your anchor as a therapist. Jeff, I don't have time. Some people share our big TED Talk people. I'm not a big TED Talk people, but this is my favorite TED Talk. And because I find, you ever have that where you see somebody, you're like, that's what I'm talking about. Rita Pearson, Every Kid Needs a Champion. I show it at a lot of other trainings. I'm telling you, I guarantee you'll be moved by it. You'll be like, yeah, go Rita. She's a teacher. She's awesome. But she'll talk to you about engagement, because what she keeps it real. She's a teacher, and she talks about, it's easy to be engaging when you like someone, but she talks about working with kids that are difficult and that are hard to engage. And she says it right out. You're not going to like them all, but they can never know it. You give people your best. You find the good in people. Sometimes we have to mine for it. You know what I mean? But we find the good, and we connect with it. Okay. A lot of this is about letting go of your ego. And if you're a parent, you know about this stuff. When you think about being a parent, you're going to run the house a certain way, and then you get your kids and you're like, whoa, man, this is nothing like what I thought it was going to be. They need a course in that in high school, like adulting. When I became an adult, I was like, oh man, this is what I'm 52 years old. I'm like, I'm not prepared for this. This is a lot. Like when you're a kid, you see adults and you're like, look at these adults, man. Wow, they really know what they're doing. And then you become one, you're like, wow, a lot of guesswork going on here. So, but we got to let go of our ego if we're going to engage. Avoid those power struggles, knowing, especially in the substance use world, people are going to get over. I think in substance use, some counselors get caught up on that. I'm going to get you. You can't get over on me. You're not going to use and let me catch. They're going to get over. They have these people that have time, that have nothing to do but plan. They're going to get over. Kids are going to get over on you for sure. You're not the FBI. It's not personal. We're not there to call people out and shame them. And a lot of this comes from personality, so you see that a lot more in adults. But again, I think people that work with the more engaged, the difficult types. I just said this to somebody the other day. They were talking about how they, this is their thing, working with difficult, more challenging youth. And I said, I believe you when you say you're good at it, because I can hear as you speak, you don't have a big ego. People with a big ego, they might do well for a little bit, but kids will destroy that. You're how smart you think you are, you're doomed. So a lot of this is letting go of your ego. And believe me, kids will put that to the test. If you're going to engage with kids, be prepared. A lot of things go off topic, but winging it and working with kids is not a good strategy. The more difficult the more problems you're faced with, the more you should be prepared, especially when you're working with families. You should be ready to bring something to the table, do your homework, bring some things. And I always say, be prepared for the bomb factor. You might have something ready to go. Oh, this is going to be great. I just did this exercise, or, somebody like me, Ken showed me this cool thing to do. And then you try it, the kids 5 minutes into it, like, this sucks. They're just not vibing with it that day. Be prepared to have, I always say, be over prepared. Especially, I'm not talking day to day. Sometimes you can wing it when you have a rapport, but when you're going into battle, so to speak, with someone who's going to really challenge you, you want to be prepared for it. Okay. So so we're going to talk about some of these evidence-based approaches. Again, you could spend whole day, week-long trainings on some of these. But let me talk briefly on how to bring some of these things. Everybody knows what CBT got. I hope guys know what it is. Cognitive behavioral therapy. If not, learn about it. If you don't, it's just about skill building. But and it's very important to have a toolbox of skills to use with kids. If you want to engage kids, you want to work well with kids. However, when you're working with people with lower motivation levels and lower insight levels, they're not ready to use the skills. So if anyone ever came to me and said, I'm a CBT only therapist, or that's it, I only use a cognitive behavioral approach, I would tell them, you're going to have a hard time with people that aren't ready. And here's the example I use. Let me use my oldest son, Kenny. He's now 23. I could say when he was a kid, hey, Kenny, your room's a mess. I use this one all the time. Forgive me if you heard it already. Your room's a mess. I want you to clean your room, Ken. And I don't know how to clean my room, Dad, or I don't want to, whatever. Here's a vacuum. I get him all the tools needed to clean his room. And I get him cleansers and vacuums, and I show him how to use it. And I wake up the next day and his room's not clean. Why do you think that is? If we had more time, I'd throw it out to the group. And I'm sure somebody would get it. It's because he doesn't want to clean his room. So sometimes just bringing CBT, again, I'm not downing it. CBT is actually very important to having those skills. But sometimes you can't even get somebody to use the skills unless you can get in that motivational standpoint with them. Motivational interviewing, if you want to learn a skill, that's probably what's changed the substance use treatment world more than anything. About a listening change talk, non-confrontational, non-judgmental, and it's all based on empathy and listening skills. And that's where it comes actually from Carl Rogers back in the 50s. Reflective listening, like not going into it. If I had to encapsulate it in not going into it saying, I'm the expert, here's what you need to do. No, letting the client go, what's inside this client and drawing it out. That's really what motivational interviewing is in a nutshell. But when you get down to it, with working with adolescents, if anyone says, when anyone working with adolescents says, I'm an MI only therapist, you got to be careful. Sometimes with clients, you got to bring more than just reflective listening. You got to be prepared to do a little fishing. And people ask me that all the time. Again, I'll throw a practical tool out there. That's why I get this question all the time. What do you do with a kid that won't talk? And I would say, get ready to fish. You got to keep casting that line out. And what do you do when you got to know when you have a bite? You look at their eyes. You look at did they look up at you? And I don't care what the topic is. It could be music. It could be fighting. It could be, drugs. If you got a kid that doesn't want to talk and he's willing to talk or she's willing to talk, you get them talking. And don't worry about it. I've had counselors say to me, I didn't feel like that was therapy. All we talked about was sports. If you got a kid that won't talking, you're making moves. You're engaging. You don't want to stay that way. Stages of change model is about matching our our interventions with where kids are at motivationally. So trauma-informed care we touched on, and I got this from the National Council. They have a lot of good stuff. Again, I highlighted being respectful and sensitive, making things a safe and trusting environment. It takes a lot of introspection. The language we use, the way we approach people. Sometimes letting other people see how we might think we're being nice, but our biases come through. We heard the term implicit bias. We sometimes need other people to check or help check us, because you can make a place unsafe very easy just with a very subtle action. So to be trauma informed, it's important to keep that in check. Let me talk a little bit about harm reduction, and because I'm running out of time. We know recovery never looks like that thing on the left. I shouldn't say never, but very, very rarely. It looks a lot more like this thing on the right. In fact, I still say this one on the right is very positive. I think it goes way off the charts sometimes. So it's a process. Harm reduction, people get hung up on harm reduction. You hear the term harm reduction. Everybody, what do the people think about right off the bat? Needle exchange, methadone clinics. Yeah, those are forms of harm reduction, but harm reduction is really an attitude. So I'll probably end on this, but it's a part of being engaging is to be, and you don't have to just do this with substances. You can do this with mental health. It's starting where the person is and accepting incremental change. So if you get one thing out of today, you know the basics of harm reduction. Can you start where the person is and accept incremental change? And I'll give you a couple of examples on how to do that. A couple of sayings: a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. I like Arthur Ashe's upgraded version of that. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. If somebody says to me, the only reason I'm going to consider stopping smoking weed is because weed is getting too expensive, that's good enough. I'll take a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. If somebody says the only reason I'm here is because of probation, that's what I got, that's what I'm using. Whatever it is, you don't need to make it about health and wellness right from the start. Hopefully you will gain that. But we're engaging people, starting where the people we're working with are at. Again, some considerations with harm reduction. Again, I'm going to end by two. Don't hate me. People, you can't compare. It's not apples to apples. People's recovery are different. It's very different. I hear people say, I'm in recovery. I've heard parents say that. Why can't my son do it? Or my neighbor's husband stop. Why can't mine? Because everybody's different. Everybody's struggles and strengths are different. Accepting incremental change. I'll give you the illustration of the failing student. I had a real story with this about accepting it. I had a woman come to me with her son, and he was smoking lots of weed. He was using some hallucinogens too, and he was failing school. And she was a school teacher, and she was ashamed. She was so like, oh, my son's failing in school. I'm a teacher. This is so shameful. So we worked with the kid, engaged. He stopped doing smoking the weed or whatever. He might have been on probation or whatever it was. I'm not going to give myself all the credit for it, but he stopped. We got him stable with that, but he was still failing in school. Sometimes the school gets better. And the mom was like, if he would just sit with me an hour a day, I would help him go from F's to A's. And I brokered a deal, starting where I sat with the two of them. I said, how much are you willing to sit with your mom? He's like, I ain't sitting with her no hour a day. So we brokered a deal. He said, I'll sit with her a half hour twice a week. I'm like, deal. Start where you are, use what you have. I send them off. He's going to sit with you for a half hour a day. And she comes back the next week. She's like, we sat in the first session for 15 minutes, and then he wanted to get up and leave. And I was like, you know what? That was 15 minutes more than you had last time. You had 0. You went from 0 to 15, accepting incremental change. I would have bought him an ice cream cone because he sat down with me. You got to, every little bit you get is a win. We're not, in working with people shooting 50 bags a day, it's very rare that someone comes in and the next day, oh, I'm completely done. Sometimes it's good. They go from shooting heroin to drinking and smoking. And is that hey, great job, you're done now? No, but it's a step. You're accepting incremental change. Well, just my 1 number rule, and I'll leave it on this. I like to say about marijuana. It's up to you guys. Speak up, ask, communicate, and ask questions. It kills me. It's like a pet peeve of mine when I hear people say, I didn't ask about substance use, or I didn't ask about mental health because I didn't know, I didn't feel qualified. Ask the questions, assess. We have to keep our radar out there. And we're suspicious of anything. That's how we're going to help kids. That's my, if I leave people with one thing, ask those questions, because you can see consultation. People like me, call me, I'll talk to you. But ask the question. Let's get the problem first, right? Janice knows I come out to the school if you guys need me or whatever. But let's ask those questions. Okay, I got one question with 2 minutes.